how to build multi-paragraph main points. When we wrote the critique and the explanatory synthesis, which were essays number 2 and 3, our main points only occupied one paragraph each. Those essays were only 5 paragraphs long. One paragraph for the intro, one for each main point, and one for the conclusion. So now we're going to be looking at how to write essays that have more than 5 paragraphs, but still only have 3 main points. So just to remind everyone, this is what our basic paragraph looks like. We begin with a topic sentence, your claim. That's number 1. Number 2, you explain that claim. Number 3, you bring evidence into your paper. Quote, paraphrase, that kind of thing. Number 4, we use examples, illustrations, anecdotes, analogies, anything to connect the ideas in a rational way to real-world scenarios. And number 5, the statement of relevance is where we reconnect with the thesis again. So, we use this diagram because the point at the top symbolizes or represents the point of the main point, the point of the paragraph, the purpose, and then we slowly broaden out our reader's understanding of that idea with support. So these are the basic elements, and these elements don't really change when you're writing multi-paragraph main points. It's just that instead of being trapped in this simple paragraph structure, we get to use these elements, these tools, as we see fit, in a way that makes sense for our argument. We're starting to think of paragraphs as plastic, flexible, adaptable, instead of just stone. So let's talk about complex claims for a second. Basically, the more complex a topic sentence, the more complex our paragraphs need to be. So a complex claim represents complex ideas with multiple components. For example, in a hypothetical essay about the effects of illiteracy on child rearing, one main point could contain 2 ideas about the absence of role modeling in literacy. So this one main point could contain 2 different paragraphs in it. One that talks about the expectations placed upon children to read, and a second paragraph that talks about the value that children assign to reading. So both these ideas are in the same main point. They're both about literacy role modeling, but we've got to have 2 paragraphs to discuss this one main point. Here's an idea as to what this might look like as a diagram. Here we see, well, not really 2 triangles, one triangle and one rhombus, but these 2 shapes make up one main point. So we begin, number 1, with our claim, and then number 2, we explain that claim. Then number 3, we bring in quotations and paraphrases and whatever, our support. And number 4, we can illustrate with examples and anecdotes and analogies and all of that. And then when we are ready to move on to our next paragraph, in the same main point, you'll notice we knock off the point on this triangle and turn it into a rhombus. And then we begin with number 5. So this imaginary point here, above number 5, is actually this number 1. So when we say explain here on number 5, we're explaining the next part of the same claim. So we move on from explanation, our second explanation of that same claim, to statement of proof, to illustration, to statement of relevance. Now I will point out that number 8 here at the very end of this main point, we don't need this at the end of every paragraph. We just need it at the end of the main point. Reconnect with your thesis at the end of each main point. So, whether you like jazz music or not, you ought to know that there's a lot of improvising that goes on in jazz. Jazz musicians learn to manipulate melodies and riff off musical structures to meet the demands of the moment, musically speaking. So, that's basically what you need to do when you're constructing paragraphs. All of your paragraphs are not going to be identical in structure. And at some point, you'll even forget that you're using these tools. You'll just use them. You'll use claims. You'll use explanations. You'll use evidence. You'll use statements of relevance. Because that's what you have to do to make an argument. So depending on on your main point, the content of your main point, you'll need to structure your main point with maybe 2 paragraphs, or with maybe 3, maybe 4 paragraphs for a main point. It just depends on the needs of your argument. So you may have reason to repeat statements of proof and illustrations within a paragraph more than once. The next slide shows us an example of this. This is a fairly complicated paragraph, but it might be one that you write. We start number 1 with a topic sentence, then we go into the explanation, just like we always do. Then we move on to our statement of proof, which is a quotation or a paraphrase from a source. We explain that statement of proof. We go on with an illustration, and then normally we would end the paragraph. But instead, we're going to go on with more explanation. Maybe we don't need a new paragraph here. Maybe it's still in the same vein. We're just deepening the understanding. And then we have another statement of proof, another quote. Maybe illustrate that one and move on to a third one and illustrate that one, and then close with a statement of relevance. This would be a pretty lengthy paragraph, and you don't usually have paragraphs this long, but it's possible to have a paragraph this long. You don't want your paragraphs really to go over a page in length. So if that's happening, you might want to revisit how you're building your paragraphs and where would be a good place to split the paragraph. Just remember, do not begin or end paragraphs with quotations. Always set up your reader to experience a quotation, and always explain or interpret a quotation for your reader after you've used it. Another option is the internal preview. Sometimes a claim, when it has different parts to it, you need to share with the reader where you're headed in this main point. It will help your reader not get lost. So the internal preview works much like a roadmap thesis. It lets the reader know where we're headed. So it provides a clear preview of the subtopics. Here's an example. If my claim for one main point is this: a good public transportation system in Kansas City could repair the racial and economic divides, which are in fact the same, for the betterment of the entire city. Then I could go ahead and share this internal preview, which would let the reader know what each of the following paragraphs are going to discuss for this one main point. Remember, this claim is just for one main point, and the internal preview comes right after the claim and lets the reader know what each of the following paragraphs in that one main point will be about. Here's an example. If an improved public transportation system were to connect the east and west sides of the Truce Divide, we would see, number 1, increased job opportunity for residents east of the divide. Number 2, improved racial relations across the metro. And number 3, better education for KCMO public schools. So now we've let the reader know these next 3 paragraphs, which are all part of the same main point, we're going to discuss these 3 ideas located here at the end of this internal preview. So let's look at a second diagram about structuring a multi-paragraph main point with a preview. So here's how it would work. Number 1, you state your claim. 2, you offer the internal preview. 3, this is where you explain your claim, but you're only explaining the claim in regards to preview item number 1. Then go ahead with your statement of proof, quotations, paraphrases. Make sure to introduce sources if you're using them for the first time. Make sure you follow your quote with statements of interpretation. And then number 5, illustration, anecdotes, examples, etc. Now the next two paragraphs are part of the same main point, which is why we've lopped off the top of the triangle. We've created rhombuses, or rhombi. I'm not sure what the plural is of rhombus. Item number 6 is the beginning of the next paragraph. We explain the preview item number 2, explain the claim, item number 1 in the previous paragraph, explain that claim in light of preview item number 2. Then we move on with our statement of proof, interpret, explain that, examples, illustrations, anecdotes, what have you. Then we can move on to our third paragraph. Item number 9, explain preview item number 3. So we're explaining the same claim, item number 1, from that first triangle on the previous slide. We're still playing off of that same claim, but now we're explaining preview item number 3. Then we move on to our statement of proof, quotes, paraphrases, move on to illustrations, examples, anecdotes. Maybe there's more explanation. Maybe there's another quote we want to use in this paragraph and another illustration. That's fine. You can have more than one quote in a paragraph. And then we'll finish up the paragraph with a statement of relevance, and that connects back to the thesis again. So the point here is to build the paragraphs that you need. Effectively, these building blocks can be used at your discretion as long as you follow these basic principles. State your claims early and clearly. Even if your claim, your topic sentence, isn't the first sentence of your paragraph, if you have a little micro hook, a little attention getter at the beginning of a main point, that's okay. Just make sure your claim is early, first or second sentence. Make sure you explain your claims and your ideas thoroughly. Make sure you support your claims with source material. Make sure you explain and interpret source material, and make sure you illustrate your ideas with examples, anecdotes, that kind of thing. Connect your main points to the thesis. If you have a main point that feels like it's not really connected to the central argument of your paper, you probably don't need that main point. So, this is how we build multi-paragraph main points. I hope this makes sense to you, and let me know if you have